فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون صدق الله العظيم. My respected brothers and sisters, Islam is a very practical religion, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He assigns the believers a responsibility, He also gives exception to some extraordinary situations. So although the fasting of the day of Ramadan al-Mubarak is obligatory, but there are certain exceptions and excuses given to the people who are really deserving the excuses. Some of these excuses are, you can call it, for the longer period, or some of them are the temporal excuses. The temporal excuses, they require making up for the missed days. And those which are for the longer period, like terminal sickness or a person being old or very sick, it requires just the fidya, which is paying for one person's food per missed days. But very often, here in the United States of America, we are so spoiled. We enjoy the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so much so that sometimes our nafs sometimes comes and keeps on looking for excuses so that somehow we can miss the days of Ramadan. So one has to be very careful, especially during this summer when the fasting is going to be almost 16 hours. Many of us are going to be looking for some excuses. Every Ramadan, I hear these kinds of questions. Oh, I've got very bad headache. I am feeling disoriented. I'm feeling nauseatic. I can tell you, my brothers and sisters, we enjoy the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so much so that our nafs have started dictating us. And sometimes we try to find the loopholes, and we can find that loopholes almost everywhere. You can shop for fatwas, and you can find every kind of fatwa you are looking for. But remember one thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us all inside out. And when He has given us certain excuses or certain exceptions, He has established certain boundaries. If our excuse does not fit in that box, then our rukhsah is not permitted. So if somebody would take the rukhsah without the proper permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or without fulfilling the basics which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established, then that person will not be able to compensate himself or herself for the missed day, even if he or she fasts the rest of his or her life. As the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man aftara yawman min Ramadan min duni rukhsa wala marad." If a person will miss one day of Ramadan intentionally, without having proper excuse of sickness or proper other concessions which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established it, then even if that person fast the entire life, that person will not be able to compensate for the missed reward or the ajr which he or she has missed during the month of Ramadan. وَلَوْ سَامَ الدَّهْرَ كُلُّ لَمْ يَقْتِهِ وَلَوْ سَامَ الدَّهْرَ كُلُّ. The Prophet ﷺ said, one missed day of Ramadan will never be compensated for, even if the person does what? The entire life of fasting. So I want to remind you, when you are looking for fatwas, when you are shopping for fatwas, make sure that you go during this month of Ramadan with azima and not with all the time rukhsah. The concessions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are there. But we should not make a habit of getting the concessions all the time, because He has sent us for a purpose, and that purpose is to struggle in His ways and to struggle to please Him. And I can tell you, during the month of Ramadan, the best of the struggle for a mu'min is to observe the fasting with its proper boundaries and with its proper ahkamat and the rulings which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us. Now, coming to some of these excuses, I mentioned to you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْهُ وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. That the person who is resident in his own town and is not traveling, and the person who is not sick, and the person is beyond the age of puberty, this is obligatory for him or to her to fast the month of Ramadan. But those people who are traveling, or those people who are sick, they are given the permission by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what is that sickness which will permit a person not to fast? The sickness which is going to be what? Complicated. The health conditions which will be complicated by means of fasting that day or the days of Ramadan. So if your doctor tells you, and not only one non-Muslim doctor, but a group of doctors, including some of the Muslims, that by day of fasting or by fasting the days of Ramadan, you are going to be making your sickness worse, or the complication will become so much that you will not be able to control it, that is the only time when you will have the exception or the excuse. Very often we go to the non-Muslim doctors, and those non-Muslim doctors do not know the importance or the significance of the day of fasting. And when you tell them 16 hours of fasting, not drinking, not, mashallah, the basics of your necessities, they are going to be astonished and they are going to say, stop it. But if you go to the Muslim doctors, they will know what is the importance of the day of fasting. So if few of them agree that your sickness is to that extent that it will complicate the situation, then you are allowed to miss the day and to make up for that mistake. I know the opinion of some of the scholars who are very easy on this issue, and they say that the Quranic text says, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ, that whosoever among you is sick or is traveling, that person is given the excuse. And they also say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say the marad, which is going to be al-marad al-shadid, which is going to be what? Yazidu bisawmi, that which is going to be increasing because of your fasting. So they say that the concession is generic. So even if somebody has got headache or stomach problem or nauseating, that person can what? Stop the fasting and make up for the missed days. But I can tell you, this is too lenient of the opinion. If just because of headache or some stomach virus or because of flu, a person is able not to fast, then there is not much left in the act of fasting. Because the act of fasting is the show of your patience. It's a struggle against your nafs. So if you are unable to do the struggle even in the month of Ramadan, believe me, there is not much excuse for you. And I can tell you, my brothers and sisters, wallahi, the month of Ramadan carries so much sawab. And as we have known from the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the acts are increased in reward. That even if you have got the genuine excuse, but you could have pushed yourself and fasted the day of Ramadan, and you did not, wallahi, even if you do the rest of your life fasting, you will not get the sawab equal to that missed day of Ramadan. I know some of my teachers, and one time I was traveling with my dad, rahmatullah alayhi, and it was 110 degrees. I could not take fasting at all. I was thirsty and hungry, and you know what happens in Pakistan. And I asked him, why don't you stop fasting too? He said, tell me, when can I make up for that missed day in Ramadan? Because every Ramadan it's obligatory for me to fast. I cannot make up for the missed day of Ramadan.
And there's no other month or day equal to the day of Ramadan. So therefore, whatever you can do, try your best not to miss the day of Ramadan. And you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahaba Ridwanullah Ali Majma'in are traveling with him. Some of them are little sick also. But the Prophet ﷺ, when they asked the question, Ya Rasulullah sallam, if I push myself, I can still fast. Inni ajidu minni quwwa. The hadith is in Al-Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ said, In sumta fa ahsanna. If you are able to fast, it's good for you. But if you want to stop fasting, it's also okay for you. So Sahaba Ridwanullah Ali Majma'in, those who were traveling with Rasulullah sallam, and you can imagine the heat of the desert, and they are capable of fasting, they will still fast even though they are in the warfare or they are traveling with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So little sickness or traveling to Chicago or St. Louis should not stop you from fasting. I also know that the scholars have given the permission that if you are traveling over 40 miles, or if you are traveling and the time period which you are going to be traveling for is less than 15 days, as the Ahnaf say, you have got the right to shorten your prayers. So whenever you have got the right to shorten prayers, you have got the right not to fast during that day. Wallahi, my brothers and sisters, all of us, we know, mashallah, our cars are air conditioned. Mashallah, we go through the aircraft and everything is air conditioned. We just take 2 hours to reach wherever you want to, or 3 hours. And rest of the day, mashallah, if there's not too much of work on you and you can maintain the day of fasting, I will strongly recommend never ever miss the day of Ramadan. Now, the same permission is given to the sisters who are going through their monthly cycle. Even if they want to fast, it is required of them not to fast. Same thing happens with the nufasa, those who are coming out of their delivery and the post-delivery 40 days. They are not permitted to fast. And they are not required to give fidya. They are required to make up for the missed days after the month of Ramadan al-Mubarak. Now those people who are elderly, those people who are terminally sick or ill, are those people who are really going to be jeopardizing their health by means of fasting. These are the people about whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. That these people should give a fidya, that one person, one miskin should be fed per missed days. So for instance, if an elderly adult misses the entire month of Ramadan al-Mubarak, and you can imagine, ta'amu miskin, the feeding of one person could be done with $5 or it could be done with $10. Now you want to show your charity and generosity during the month of Ramadan. Do not become stingy. For instance, if you are going to fast, you will have to eat something in the morning, one meal in the morning, and one meal in the evening. With $5, $10, I don't think you will be able to feed yourself properly if you are fasting. So be generous. Give between $10 to $15 per missed days, so that if there is anything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the extra credit. And if this is something which will take care of a miskin's food, then your fidya is complete. So those elderly people, those sick people who will not be able to fast during the month of Ramadan, what they should do is, they should calculate the days and give the fidya from the beginning of the month, so that some of the miskin, some of the poor people, they can eat, they can drink, they can enjoy their day of fasting, and by means of their du'as, this person is given the sawab, or that person is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, remember one thing, my brothers and sisters, that this Ramadan should be on our mind perhaps as the last Ramadan of our life. You never know. The call can come at any time. Very often we think, let me inshallah take care of this Ramadan, I'm a young man, and inshallah there will be plenty of Ramadan on the way, and I can inshallah spend some more time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the following Ramadan. But you never know. one of the rebel leaders in Libya, Abdel Fattah Yunus,